I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember a specific sound from your childhood. Perhaps it is the rhythmic ticking of the heavy Frisian tail clock on your grandmother's wall, or maybe it is the distinct metallic pop of a beautiful tin box opening, followed by the rich, warm scent of freshly brewed filter coffee and cinnamon. Welcome back to a time when life was simpler, when our neighborhoods were our entire universe, and when the rules we lived by shaped who we are today. Today we are going to look back at 20 normal rules and rituals for Dutch children growing up in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. To the modern world, some of these might seem absolutely absurd, but to us, they were just life. And stay with me until the very end, because we will talk about a specific winter ritual that I am certain will bring a tear of sweet nostalgia to your eyes. Before we begin our journey, let us remember how time used to flow back then. It moved slower, without the constant rush and anxiety that seems to grip the world today. We did not have smartphones buzzing in our pockets or endless streams of television shows on demand. Waiting was a natural part of life. We waited for our favorite weekly radio program. We waited for the weekend to get our special treat, and we waited for the postman to bring news from afar. There is a common myth today that because we lacked modern technology, our lives were somehow emotionally poorer or less connected. The absolute opposite is true. Because we did not stare at screens, we looked at each other. Our connections were forged on the cobblestone streets, over the garden fences, and around the small dining tables. Life was richer in sincerity, and our imaginations were our greatest source of entertainment. Let us step back into that warm, beautifully slow world. Now, let us remember one of the most unbreakable laws of any Dutch household, the sacred rule of the cookie tin. If you grew up in the Netherlands, you know exactly what I am talking about. Whenever guests arrived, or when the clock struck exactly 4 in the afternoon, Mother would bring out the tea and the famous decorated metal tin. The lid would come off with a soft metallic pop, releasing the heavenly aroma of butter, syrup, and baked sugar. You were allowed to look, to carefully inspect the assortment, but the golden rule was absolute. You could only take exactly 1 cookie, not 2, never 3, just 1. As soon as your fingers grasped that single treat, the lid would snap back on with a decisive click, and the tin would vanish back into the cupboard. Today, children have endless access to snacks, pantries full of sweets ready to be devoured at any moment. But back then, that single cookie was a treasure. You did not just eat it hastily, you savored it. You took tiny bites, letting it melt on your tongue, stretching the joy for as long as the cup of tea lasted. This rule might seem absurdly strict to modern generations, but it taught us a profound lesson in moderation and appreciation. It taught us that joy is not found in abundance, but in the careful, mindful enjoyment of a single, perfect moment shared with family. And what about the absolute freedom of Wednesday afternoons? In the 1960s and 70s, Wednesday was the magical hinge of the week. As soon as the school bell rang at noon, the serious part of the day was over. You would rush home, the sound of your leather shoes slapping against the pavement, feeling a sense of immense liberty. Mother would be waiting with a cup of warm tea and perhaps a slice of spice cake. But you did not stay inside for long. The rule was simple but firm. You must go outside and play until the streetlights turn on. It did not matter if the sky was grey or if a chilly wind was blowing from the North Sea. You grabbed your coat and ran out to meet your friends. The street was our playground, our kingdom. We built forts, drew elaborate chalk tracks on the tiles, or just sat on a low brick wall talking about everything and nothing. There were no scheduled playdates, no adult supervision organizing our games. We had to invent our own fun, resolve our own childish disputes, and use our boundless imagination. When the pale yellow streetlights finally flickered to life, it was the universal signal to run back home for dinner. That pure, unstructured time is something modern children, with their packed schedules, rarely get to experience. Let us talk about breakfast and the very strict etiquette surrounding our beloved chocolate sprinkles. Every morning began with a slice of bread, a generous layer of butter, and a careful coating of chocolate. But there were rules. You could never, under any circumstances, pour the sprinkles directly into your mouth from the cardboard box. That was a serious offense. And if you dropped any sprinkles on your plate while eating, you were required to press your finger onto the stray pieces of chocolate, picking them up one by one so absolutely nothing was wasted. Furthermore, you were only allowed to have a slice of bread with sweet toppings after you had first eaten a slice with something savory, like cheese or cold cuts. We called it the first slice rule. It was a way to ensure we ate properly before indulging our sweet tooth. The crunch of those chocolate sprinkles against the soft bread is a texture that defines a Dutch childhood. We did not need fancy cereals with bright colors and marshmallows. We had our simple, perfect slice of bread, and the daily discipline of the breakfast table taught us respect for the food we were fortunate enough to have. I am sure you remember the weekly ritual of the Saturday bath. Long before every house had a modern tiled bathroom with a hot shower, cleanliness required serious effort. In the center of the kitchen, or perhaps in a small washroom, Mother would place a large, heavy zinc tub on the floor. Water was heated on the gas stove in large kettles and carefully poured in. The rule was practical and economical. The entire family shared the same bathwater. Usually, the youngest children went first, enjoying the cleanest, warmest water, while the older siblings followed. The room would fill with thick steam and the comforting, powdery scent of classic baby soap. You would scrub with a rough, knitted washcloth until your skin was pink and glowing. After the bath, you were wrapped in a thick towel and sent to sit by the gas heater in your pajamas, your hair wet and combed flat against your head. It was a long, laborious process, but it meant that Saturday evening felt incredibly special. You felt entirely renewed, sitting on the sofa, squeaky clean, ready to watch the weekend television programs with the family. It was a shared ritual of care that brought the household together. Do you recall the magic of the gas meter? In many old Dutch houses, central heating was a luxury of the future. We had a large gas heater in the living room, and it was controlled by a meter that required physical coins to operate. When the house began to grow cold and you could see your breath in the hallway, someone had to find a specific coin to drop into the slot. The rule was that we only fed the meter when it was truly necessary, usually when the family was all gathered together in the evening. You would hear the heavy clink of the coin dropping, followed by the deep, rushing sound of the gas igniting. Slowly, the metal heater would begin to tick and radiate warmth. We would all pull our chairs closer, forming a tight semicircle around the only warm spot in the house. The bedrooms upstairs remained freezing, and you would wake up with ice flowers blooming on the inside of the single-pane windows. But that one warm room downstairs became a sanctuary. The cold outside forced us to sit close together, to talk, to read our books in the shared glow of that single heater. We were united by the cold, and the simple act of putting a coin in a box felt like bringing sunshine into the home. Then there was the absolute law of the bicycle and the rain. In the Netherlands, bad weather was never an excuse to miss school or stay indoors. If the skies opened up and the rain poured down in sheets, your mother would simply hand you your heavy rubberized rain suit. It was usually a dull, practical color, incredibly stiff, and made a loud swishing sound when you walked. You would pull the hood tight around your face, hop on your bicycle, and lean into the fierce headwind. The rule was resilience. You pedaled hard, rain stinging your cheeks, tires splashing through deep puddles on the brick roads. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you got to sit on the back luggage carrier of your parents' bicycle, wrapping your arms tight around their waist, burying your face in their wet coat to hide from the wind. Arriving at school, the hallway would be filled with the distinct, damp smell of wet wool and drying rain gear. We learned very early on that we were not made of sugar, and that we would not melt in the rain. That simple rule forged a tough, enduring character in all of us, a quiet strength that we carried into adulthood. A beautiful tradition that has slowly faded away is the saving of stamps from the grocery store. It was not just a hobby, it was an unwritten rule of domestic economics. Whenever your mother bought groceries, she would receive tiny paper stamps. The ritual of bringing them home and carefully licking them to stick into a small paper booklet was a serious task, often assigned to the children. The booklets had a distinct smell of glue and cheap paper. You had to paste them perfectly straight, filling page after page. It took months of of patient saving, but the reward was always worth it. When the booklet was full, it felt like holding a brick of gold. You would walk to the store together to exchange it for a grand prize, perhaps a new set of coffee cups, a beautiful towel, or a shiny new coffee maker. In a time when money was tight and people did not buy luxury items on a whim, these saving stamps represented hope and discipline. We learned that good things take time, that small, consistent efforts eventually lead to a wonderful reward. It was a lesson in patience that seems completely lost in our modern era of instant gratification. Let us step into the mysterious territory of the good room. In many traditional Dutch homes of the 1960s, the front room of the house was kept completely separate from our daily lives. It was often called the beautiful room, and the rule was simple. Children were absolutely forbidden to enter it on ordinary days. The doors remained closed, keeping the space pristine and slightly chilly. Inside were the best velvet armchairs, the delicate porcelain figures, and a floor that smelled deeply of expensive wax. This room was strictly reserved for Sundays, for important family gatherings, or for when the local pastor came to visit. If you were ever allowed inside, you walked on tiptoes, terrified of disturbing the perfect order or leaving a fingerprint on the polished wood. Looking back, it seems absurd to have a whole room in a small house that no one used for 6 days a week. But it showed a deep respect for guests and for the sanctity of the weekend. Having a beautiful room meant you always had a place to show your best self to the world, a quiet sanctuary preserved from the chaotic mess of everyday childhood. Do you remember the distinctive rattling sound that echoed through the street in the early morning? It was the milkman arriving with his small delivery cart. Back then, milk did not come in plastic jugs from a massive supermarket. It came in thick, heavy glass bottles with shiny foil caps. The rule was that you always rinsed the empty bottles and placed them on your doorstep for collection. As children, we loved to watch the milkman work. He knew everyone in the neighborhood by name. If you were lucky, he would let you hold a cold bottle, the glass covered in condensation. In the winter, the cream at the top of the bottle would sometimes freeze and push the foil cap right off. The milkman did not just deliver dairy, he delivered the daily news, the local gossip, and a friendly smile. He was a vital thread in the social fabric of our street. Today, we buy our groceries anonymously, scanning barcodes without speaking a word. But we miss the human connection. The comfort of knowing the people who brought food to our tables and the cheerful clinking of glass bottles waking us up to a new day. Winter dinners always brought a very specific, unbreakable culinary rule, the creation of the gravy well. When the days grew short and the frost settled on the windows, our mothers would serve a massive, steaming pot of mashed potatoes mixed with kale or endive. It was heavy, honest food meant to keep you warm. But you could not just start eating. First, you had to take your fork and carefully dig a perfectly round crater right in the center of your mashed potatoes. It had to be deep enough, with strong walls, so it would not collapse. Then, Mother would come around with a small pan and pour a ladle of rich, dark, savory meat gravy directly into your little potato volcano. The goal was to eat your way around the edges, dipping small bites into the center without breaking the dam and letting the gravy flood your plate. It was a game, a ritual, and a serious matter of pride to keep the well intact until the very last bite. It made a simple, cheap meal feel incredibly special and interactive. It is a small, absurd tradition, but I guarantee that anyone from our generation still feels the urge to dig a little well whenever they are served mashed potatoes. I want you to think about the clothes we wore. In the 1960s and 70s, throwing away a piece of clothing just because it had a small hole was absolutely unthinkable. The rule was to repair, to mend, and to pass it down. Mothers kept a special wooden tool shaped like a mushroom in their sewing baskets. When you wore a hole in the heel of your thick woolen winter socks, the wooden mushroom was pushed inside and the hole was carefully darned with a needle and thread. Sweaters with frayed elbows received leather patches. Coats were passed from the oldest brother to the youngest, sometimes altered or dyed to look new. We did not care about designer brands or fast fashion. We cared about warmth and utility. Wearing a hand-me-down was not a sign of poverty. It was simply the normal way of life. It taught us to respect our belongings, to take care of the things we owned, and to understand the value of labor. There was a quiet dignity in wearing a beautifully mended sweater, a testament to a mother's love and her skilled, hard-working hands. When the first signs of spring arrived and the sun finally began to warm the pavement, a very specific seasonal rule took over the schoolyards and streets. It was time for marbles. But this was not just a casual game. It was serious business governed by strict, unwritten neighborhood laws. Every child had a little cloth bag filled with glass treasures. There were big ones, small ones, some with beautiful swirls of color inside. We played on the standard square pavement tiles, aiming for the grooves between them. The rule was absolute. Whatever you won, you kept. You had to declare the terms before the game started, shouting specific phrases to lock in the rules. Losing your favorite, most beautiful marble could break your heart, while winning a rare glass orb made you the king of the street for a day. We spent hours on our knees, our knuckles dirty, intensely focused on the geometry of the street. It taught us about risk, about fair play, and about dealing with loss gracefully. Those glass marbles were our first currency, and the street tiles were our grand casino. Friday evenings often held a magic of their own, dictated by the glorious rule of the local snack bar. In a time when eating out at a restaurant was a rare luxury reserved for anniversaries, getting food from the local fryer was the ultimate weekend treat. Your father would give you a few coins, and you would walk down to the brightly lit shop on the corner. The smell of frying fat and salt would hit you blocks away. You waited patiently in line, watching the owner scoop golden fries into a white paper cone, adding a generous, thick dollop of creamy mayonnaise right on top. The rule was that you had to hurry home before they got cold, holding the warm paper cone against your chest to protect it from the evening chill. The whole family would sit around the kitchen table, unwrapping the paper, eating the hot fries with our fingers. It was simple, it was cheap, but it felt like an absolute feast. It was a celebration of the end of the working week, a moment of pure, shared joy that tasted better than any expensive modern gourmet meal. Now, let us lower our voices and talk about a rule that involved breaking the rules, listening to the pirate radio stations. In the 1970s, the official radio channels were often polite, slow, and heavily regulated. But out on the cold waters of the North Sea, ships were broadcasting something entirely different. They played rock and roll, pop music, and songs of rebellion. The rule among teenagers was that you had to listen, but you had to be quiet about it. Late at night, you would sneak a small plastic transistor radio under your heavy woolen blankets. You would slowly turn the tuning dial, listening through the static and the crackling interference until you caught the signal of Radio Veronica or Radio Caroline. The music felt electric, dangerous, and incredibly exciting. Lying there in the dark, with the tiny speaker pressed against your ear, you felt connected to a whole generation of youth who were waking up to a new world. It was a shared secret, a quiet rebellion in the dark, and it made the music sound infinitely sweeter. There was one day a year when all the normal rules of commerce and behavior were completely thrown out the window. The end of April meant the celebration of the Queen, and the rule was that the streets belonged to the people. Before the sun even came up, families would mark their territory on the pavement with a piece of chalk or lay down a bright orange blanket. We would empty our attics and our closets, bringing out old comic books, wooden toys, and outgrown clothes. For one magical day, children became merchants. We sat on the cold ground, wearing orange ribbons in our hair, negotiating prices with strangers for a few cents. It was chaotic, loud, and incredibly festive. The smell of sweet pastries and the sound of amateur musicians filled the air. We learned how to count money, how to bargain, and how to let go of our old belongings. But mostly, it was a day of absolute equality, where the whole country came out to celebrate together on the pavement, bound by a shared sense of history and community. Let us recall the strict rationing of sweets, specifically the sacred Sunday licorice. Candy was not an everyday occurrence. It was heavily regulated by mothers who believed sugar was something to be earned and carefully managed. The rule was that on Sunday, after church or after lunch, you would receive your weekly treat. Very often, it was a long, tightly wrapped paper roll of firm, salty black licorice. The coins were small, shiny, and stamped with little figures or letters. The challenge was to make that single roll last as long as humanly possible. You did not chew it, you let it rest against your cheek, letting it slowly dissolve, savoring the deep, rich, salty flavor that is so incredibly unique to our culture. If you finished your roll by Sunday evening, you knew you had to wait an entire week for the next one. It taught us discipline and the true meaning of anticipation. Today, the idea of rationing a small roll of licorice over a whole week seems absurd to children, but to us, it made Sunday the sweetest day of the week. Springtime brought a very loud, rhythmic rule to every neighborhood, the ritual of beating the carpets. Once the winter was truly over, it was time for the great spring cleaning. The rule was that dust could not simply be vacuumed away, it had to be violently expelled. Every housewife had a special woven rattan carpet beater. They would drag the heavy woolen living room rugs out into the alleyway or hang them over a sturdy clothesline in the garden. Then the symphony began. Whack, whack, whack. You could hear the sound echoing down the street, accompanied by huge clouds of dust catching the pale spring sunlight. As children, we were often tasked with helping, swinging the beater with all our might until our arms ached. It was hard physical labor, but it was also a deeply communal event. Neighbors would talk over the fences while they worked, comparing the dust, sharing cleaning secrets. When the rug was finally brought back inside, the whole house smelled fresh, airy, and renewed. It was a physical manifestation of starting over, of welcoming the light back into our homes. What happened when we got sick? The rules of illness were very different back then. You did not immediately rush to a doctor for every little cough, and there were no shelves full of colorful, fruit-flavored medicines. The rule was patience, rest, and ancient home remedies. If your throat hurt or you felt a cold coming on, mother would put you to bed during the day. The ultimate comfort was a hot mug of milk boiled with whole anise seeds, sweetened with a generous spoonful of sugar or honey. You would lie under heavy blankets, sipping the hot, fragrant liquid, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. There were no televisions in the bedroom, no screens to distract you. You simply lay there, watching the dust motes dance in the window light, listening to the muffled sounds of the household continuing without you. The cure was time and a mother's quiet, attentive care. We learned how to be still, how to listen to our bodies, and how to appreciate the gentle comfort of a warm drink made with love. I also want to remind you of the unspoken rule of the evening walk. After dinner, especially on long, light summer evenings, the television was often ignored. Instead, the rule was to go for a stroll. Entire families would step out of their front doors to walk around the neighborhood. It was not for exercise, it was a social obligation. You walked slowly, nodding to neighbors sitting in their front gardens behind perfectly pruned hedges. You admired the flowers, commented on the weather, and exchanged the day's news. The streets were safe, quiet, and belonged to the pedestrians. This simple ritual knitted the community together. You knew everyone, and everyone knew you. If a child misbehaved 3 streets over, the parents knew about it before the child even got home. It was a web of connection, built on the simple act of walking slowly and looking at the world around you. We did not need social media to know what our neighbors were doing. We just had to take a walk after dinner. And finally, let us talk about the most magical rule of all, the one that governed the dark, cold days of late November, the putting out of the shoe. When Sinterklaas arrived in the country, the tension in the house was palpable. The rule was that you could only put your shoe by the chimney or the back door on specific nights. You had to find your sturdy leather winter shoe, place it carefully, and fill it with a large carrot or a handful of hay for the white horse Amerigo. But the most important part of the rule was the song. You had to stand by the chimney and sing with all your heart into the dark, soot-filled opening. You sang loudly, hoping the good saint on the roof could hear your devotion. Then you went to bed, heart pounding, unable to sleep. Waking up in the cold morning, running to the living room and finding the carrot gone, replaced by a single chocolate letter or a handful of spiced nuts, was pure, unadulterated magic. That feeling of wonder, of innocent belief, is a treasure that belongs eternally to our youth. When we look back at all these rules, these strange little rituals of our past, we realize something profound. We do not just miss the heavy zinc bathtubs, the clicking cookie tins, or the glass milk bottles. We miss the feeling of being deeply connected to the people around us. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of life that allowed us to appreciate a single piece of licorice or a warm room. Most of all, we miss our youth and the people who made these rules out of love and care for us. Those days may be gone, but they live on vividly in our hearts. If this journey brought back memories for you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It helps us continue to preserve these beautiful stories. Now, I have a question for you. Which of these 20 rules do you remember most clearly? Or what is a special childhood rule from your own family that I missed? Please, write your personal story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I cannot wait to share in your memories. Thank you for walking down memory lane with me, and until next time.